it is on this day, June 8th, 2022, that I am talking about terms describing sex stances. Before I dive into what that means, I'm going to map out this episode. So, right off the bat, we're going to define what sex stances are, and also dive right into this big clarifying point I want to say right off the bat. It fits in the end section, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, but I think it's part of the definition of what a sex stance is, so I just want to touch it right off the bat, and then right after that we'll dive into the 5 main sex stance terms that I have seen used and used myself, and the ones I feel the most fluent in. That doesn't mean that these are all the sex stances out there. I'm sure there are more, but again, these are the ones I feel the most comfortable defining, and I feel are the required ones to know, especially if you see people using these words. And then after that, I want to dive into misconceptions that people have towards these, and also clarifying points about just how much experiences can vary under these. And I want that to be one of the biggest takeaways in this video, is that there are a load of varying experiences under these terms, even if the definitions sound very clear-cut. There's infinitely many experiences underneath, and these are just words to help cover those experiences, but that does not mean that it completely explains what someone feels. So, want to hit that right off the bat. And then also right off the bat, dive into the definition. And so, what is a sex stance? Well, a sex stance is like a personal regard towards the act or concept of sexual interaction. Now, these terms may be commonly used by people on the asexuality spectrum, but it is not at all exclusive to that community or to any sexuality. People who are bi or pan or gay or straight or any sexuality, asexual, anything, can use these terms to describe their experience because, again, these are terms for anybody, because the act or concept of sexual interaction has nothing to do with a person's sexual attraction. I just want to make that clear right off the bat. Sexual interaction is not sexual attraction. Very clear. So, people who are asexual, people who are allosexual, people who are anywhere between or aside can use these labels. Now, to start off, there are 3 main labels that are used the most common, and they may be intuitive in their definition, but I'm going to explain them anyway. And these labels are sex favorable, sex indifferent, and sex repulsed. Sex favorable is a sex stance that describes a person who is favorable towards or enjoys the act or concept of sexual interaction. And then sex indifferent, which is also called sex neutral sometimes, is a stance of someone who has no strong feelings regarding the act or concept of sexual interaction. And sex repulsed is a stance of someone who is repulsed by the act or concept of sexual interaction. So, I can't really dive more into these terms because, again, they have that very flat definition. They're very flat, but people who are under any of these labels can still have varying experiences under them and have factors that I'll cover later on. Particularly sex repulsed has just a lot of different experiences under it. But we'll dive into that in that section. But before we get there, there are 2 additional terms that I have seen used a fair amount by people and that I have used that myself that don't really fit with the main 3 that I just wanted to cover because I feel that they're very useful to know. And those 2 terms are sex ambivalent and sex adverse. These are a lot more open and a lot harder to define. In fact, they're so open to the point that I can't even give examples of these that would accurately portray like their full meaning. And so both of them I have an example or like a list of words that can help describe them, but these I want to cover before I get into definitions. Both of these terms go much, much more beyond what I can say. With that said, sex ambivalent, which sometimes is called sex conflicted, is a sex stance that describes an individual who has mixed or complicated, I'm sorry using that word, I couldn't find another one, feelings regarding the act or concept of sexual interaction. This can go many, 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 many ways. It's a very open label that describes a specific experience. But to give just one example of a person that would use the term sex ambivalent would be someone who may be repulsed by certain sex acts while are favorable or indifferent towards other ones. But that's just one example. There's many, many other ways that can go. And sex adverse is similar in that, again, it doesn't have one experience and it's open to individual experiences, but a general definition is that it's a stance where people may find the idea of engaging in sexual activity undesirable, uncomfortable, uninteresting, or just generally unwanted. Maybe they just don't feel repulsed, like people who identify with sex repulsed are, but they also just, they aren't sex indifferent, or they aren't sex favorable, or they aren't sex ambivalent. They just still are adverse to the concept or act of sex for themselves personally. So, again, these people can feel favorable or indifferent towards sexual interaction that does not involve themselves, or sexual interaction as a concept, but maybe, this is just one of many, many ways, maybe they are just adverse to themselves personally. It's just one example. A lot more ways that can go. Whew. Breather. A lot of information. And now we dive into clarifying points about all these terms. The first one I want to cover, and this one goes hand in hand with number 2, and it's not the best transition in the world, so there's the warning now, but the first one I want to cover is that these don't have to be constant. And, you know, whether or not there's an experience or like an event that happens in someone's life, or if it's just random, things can change in people's lives. And it really can, there doesn't have to be a cause for someone's change. So I just want to say, hey, if someone is sex repulsed for a period of time, that doesn't mean that they are always experiencing sex repulsion. And I don't mean that in the sex ambivalent kind of way. And so I will have a video describing my personal experience with sex repulsion, which falls under this category. But for me, sex repulsion isn't constant, but it's also not like sex ambivalent, where I'm sex repulsed sometimes and not other times. It's like a full-on experience for a block of time. But then if I work it out, then my sex repulsion can go away and I won't have any. But it's really hard to explain, but people change. And that's just my explanation of how my sex stance changes just randomly due to sex repulsion coming in. But sometimes sex stances can change due to an event in someone's life, or again, it can just be random. Just something happens or something doesn't happen, and switch in the brain, someone's sex stance changes, and it's perfectly valid for someone's label and identity and experience to change. So I really wanted to cover that. But right after that, since I used the words event and like something happening so much, I wanted to cover that while a bunch of people can have events or trauma or other things that they can pin their stance and experiences as a cause of, particularly with sex repulsed, not everybody has a cause. And for the sake of everything, people are not required to have a reason or background or whatever to prove their experience to you. And that goes for all identities, not just these. Just in general, people don't have to have a reason. People don't have to have a cause. People don't have to have like some like medical brain reason thing to explain why they have the sex stance they have. And so I just really wanted to say that right before I also say, hey, sometimes people can recognize a cause and work through that cause to change their sex stance, like my first point. And so these two go hand in hand. These two can go a lot of different ways. People can not have these factors as part of their experience, or people can have these factors as part of their experience. It doesn't have to be constant. There doesn't have to be a cause, but there can be constant and there can be a cause. And so I just wanted to say those two things. There's a lot more factors like these, but those are the main two I wanted to cover. And then I have two additional points about the misconceptions, or like how people interpret these terms. And so the first of those 2 points is that these terms are completely separate, not even the same ballpark, at sex positive and sex negative. Those two terms are more like political positions or like personal opinions. To give an example, or to generally define them, sex positive is like having a positive outlook towards sexual expression and sexuality and support sexual freedoms, while sex negative individuals are against those things I just listed. And so included in this like kind of conversation are topics like sex work, or the creation of media about sex, or like even sex education. Sometimes sex negative people can be against sex education. And so again, I just want to make it clear that people can be sex repulsed or sex adverse or sex indifferent, but still be supportive of sexual freedom. And so, as per usual, don't assume things about people's identities. Asexual people can be sex favorable. Asexual, sex repulsed people can be sex positive. And kinky. Like, they can be anything, and it's all valid. And so those terms are separate from these, and those are separate terms that people can use to describe their perspective and political opinion on those kinds of topics. And the fourth one I want to say, and it really sucks that I even have to say this at all, but lo and behold, when I Googled some of these terms to like make sure that my definitions were clear and to find the best wording for these, because wording is hard, a lot of these results came up. And so I have to say right here at the end that these aren't disorders, they're not syndromes, they're not phobias, and they also don't represent like a lack of libido. These are personal preferences and stances and regards that people have for themselves and their bodies, and it doesn't have to mean those things. In fact, don't even imply those things to anybody, especially if you can't teleport into their shoes and see their experience. Let them decide that. Let them go to a doctor or medical center or whatever if they think those are things for them, but don't imply that to anybody. Don't, because large percent of the time that is not what is actually happening. And these terms are valid for people to use to describe their experience, and they don't have to have problems. Ugh. Just, oh my god, sometimes, man, sometimes the things that are out there. To conclude, I suppose, I will have videos in the future talking about those kinds of things that happen, like things that are not okay to say to people, or things that are implied by society or the internet that can be really annoying or very negative towards our identities. And also, since I mentioned it earlier, in the future, don't know when, but at some point I will have a video talking about, hey, asexual people can be kinky, and just having that as a whole topic, because I don't think it's said enough at all. So those are things that are coming in the future. Don't know when, but they're just out there. And I hope you guys have a happy Pride Month, and I'll see you all hopefully next Wednesday. Bye-bye.